Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
If you want to go to the next level, if you want to be the 20%, right, the 10%, the 5%, the seven-figure earners that I've been lucky enough, to work with, you have to add in that third component. You need a strategy, right? Your limiting resource as a salesperson, as a human being, is your ability to focus.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Hi, this is Brian Marglois with ProductivityGiant.com. And I'm hoping you will tune in and learn how you can actually grow your sales business through simplification.
On today's episode with the legend that is Brian, we're diving into how we can work less hours and earn more revenue and so more commissions. How we can focus on the pillars of the activities that we need to do that actually move the needle rather than all the stuff around the outside that doesn't really do much for us. Let's jump right in. So with that said, all things considered, is it fair to say that someone who has great or even impeccable sales skills but has no strategy is probably always going to be an average performer?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great way to position it. The way I look at it is most people's success in terms of their sales career is based on two factors. You combine what you just talked about. You combine their skills, right? Their talents, skills, and then that can be a blurry line. And you kind of combine their sales skills and talents, their emotional intelligence, things like that, with their work ethic. And when you kind of mix those two into a pot, that's the level of success most people are at. Now, for some people, that's enough, right? You can kind of grind your way to a certain level, right? If you're skilled and you're hardworking. If you want to go to the next level, if you want to be the 20%, right? The 10%, the 5%, the seven-figure earners that I've been lucky enough, to work with, you have to add in that third component. You need a strategy, right? Your limiting resource as a salesperson, as a human being, is your ability to focus, right? Your ability to focus on these cognitively demanding activities throughout a day or a week. And so you have to have a strategy to make sure where you're using that focus, where you're using your mental energy, is giving you a big return on investment. And that's what I mean by a strategy. And again, there's a lot of people listening that probably think they have a strategy, and we can talk more about that. But I would say 90% of the people that I work with, they don't have as much a strategy as just a bunch of hopes and goals and areas they want to focus on. Words without agreed upon definitions is a great way to put it.
For sure. And I'll speak to this and open up about it. We're 4 years into the business now. We're kind of edging towards decent revenue numbers for a small organization like ours. I've got no strategy. I have no idea what I'm doing. All I do is put out a podcast 3 times a week, build the sales school. That's becoming more and more a priority over time as it drives more and more revenue. But beyond that, I've no idea what the heck's going on. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And so I'm sure there's some of the audience are nodding along as you go through that, Brian. And I'm certainly going to learn a lot in this episode myself. With that said, just one last thing to kind of build a bit of context before we get into the strategy itself. So the word focus. Are the highest performers, are they capable of sitting there from 6 a.m. till 7 p.m., just heads deep in a laptop or on the phone and crushing it over and over and over and over? What does focus look like for a high performer in practically in reality?
Yeah, so there's two levels. None of us, the best of the best, it's just biology, right? It's just biology. You cannot focus on cognitively demanding activities, right? Synthesis, strategic thinking, right? The things that willpower, the things that use up I'm going to use mental energy, not to get scientific, right? But you've heard this kind of stuff where, willpower eventually wears out, and, we've all experienced it, like, right? Are you the most productive at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I mean, is that when you're having your greatest ideas and crushing it, right? So if you accept the reality that we only have so much mental energy, we only have a limited ability to focus on these cognitively demanding activities, then you realize that focus management is more important than time management, right? Because there's plenty of time There's no correlation between how many hours somebody puts in and how successful they are, right? You've heard it put as how you use that time. Now, I will tell you this. Once you've learned how to manage your focus and place it in the right places that give you the highest return, there are ways to increase your ability to focus. There are techniques to increase your ability to concentrate, right? I mean, the most successful people are meditators. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. If you look at what meditation actually is, it's the same thing a performance coach would tell you to do to increase your concentration. They tell you to focus on something for a little bit. If your mind wanders, bring it back. But if you just increase your mental energy, your ability to focus without having focus management, then you're just, you have more focus, but you're not doing anything with it. So without getting into increasing that kind of stuff, you can talk to performance coaches for that kind of stuff, and I'm a big fan of it. But let's take the low hanging fruit. How about where are you putting your focus on a week to week, day to day basis? That's what the pillar system's about. It makes sure you take that limited focus and get the highest return on investment.
Good. So we'll dive into the pillar system next, and the first principles of business and what we need to focus on to have a return whatsoever. Because there's plenty of activities that we do each day which have no return. We just do them because we're perhaps told to. They're just dumped in our desk. So we'll cover that in a second. But what are your thoughts on? And I see this as a recent kind of past 3-year phenomenon of kind of like hustle culture and being the last one out of the office is the winner somehow. All this kind of stuff. Is there a trend between high performers and individuals who are crushing it and, I guess, ridiculous amounts of hours worked?
No. And here's what I mean. Again, as a former scientist, right? I'm a big fan of, you'll hear me challenge assumptions. I'm a big fan of data. And I'm also a big fan of correlation versus causation. So I think there's a minimum price to entry. If you're going to be successful in sales, there obviously is a minimum amount of hours, let's call it, you're going to have to put in, right? But once you get past that minimum, I don't think you'll see any relationship between how many hours somebody works and how successful they are. In other words, if you just plot it on a graph, right, you're going to have people who average 30 hours a week who are uber successful, and people averaging 30 hours a week who are, might not have a job in a few weeks, right? You can also go to the other end of the spectrum and have guys working 80 hours a week who are doing very well, and guys working 80 hours a week who are not doing so well. And so that's what I mean when I say there's no relationship there, right? I'm not saying you don't have to work hard, but I can tell you this. If we just peel off some of the bigger producers I work with, some of the 7-figure earners, some of the guys who literally get W-2s, they have jobs, but they're absolutely crushing it. They're salespeople. Far and away, they do a lot less meetings and a lot less activity than probably most of the people who are struggling. And that's just a fact. So again, there's not a relationship. And I think the other part is here. I used to be this way where it was kind of a badge of honor how late I worked. The fact that no one when I used to rent an office, there was no one around me at night. When I left, I was the last car in the parking lot. And listen, let's be honest, you could do work-related stuff all day and not really move the needle. So I don't think it's as much of a badge of honor as people want to believe it is.
For sure. It's just dumb, right? I guess there's two ways looking at it.
Completely dumb.
You can, if you're doing a ton of hours and you want to do that many hours because you've got certain goals and aspirations, if you fill it with the better use of your time, then you can work the same amount of hours and have twice the effective output. And if you're doing twice as many hours and you don't want to be doing the hours, hopefully we can re-optimize people so they can drop those number of hours and they can spend time with their family and do whatever they want to do on the side of things. So with that, Brian, so can we distill sales down to the fact that our job is to drive revenue? And if that is true, what is the next layer of things that we should be doing or focusing on above that?
Right. So I think one of the assumptions I made early on when I started working with entrepreneurs and salespeople, and I really don't differentiate between the two. There's 90% overlap between entrepreneurs and salespeople because entrepreneurs need to sell and salespeople need to learn how to run a business. And most salespeople, I could say entrepreneurs too, but most salespeople have never actually been taught how to run a business. And I am getting to your question. So this next level of we just drive revenue, right? This idea that we just drive revenue, it's most salespeople, the assumption that they make is this. They know what the right things to do are. They just have trouble doing them consistently. So when you say, what is the next level? I believe what you were getting at is, we drive revenue. So therefore we have to do prospecting. We have to do follow-up. We keep it simple, the basics, all that kind of stuff. And what I would argue is most salespeople do not know what the right things to do are. And here's what I mean. They use those words I talked about earlier, those words that have no agreed upon definition. So you'll hear this. I need to focus more on blank. I need to double down on this. I need to optimize that. I just need to get better at getting in front of the right people, right? And they say, so I know what to do as a salesperson if I can just get in front of the right people. I just need to prospect more. I just need to get better at my blank, right? But those aren't the right things to do. Those are goals, right? That's not what you actually do. And here's how I define that. How do you know at the end of a week when you've optimized for something? How do you know at the end of the week that you've gotten in front of more of the right people or gotten better at this or doubled down on that, right? You can't measure it. So those are good starting places, right? But one of the criterias of these pillars that I talk about is you have to be able to measure it weekly, meaning you have to at some point during the week actually know that you've done it. So instead of saying, I need to get better at getting in front of the right people, okay, that's a starting point. That's a goal, though. It's not something to do. It's a goal. What does that actually boil down to? What can be measured? Well, it could be a pillar of, I need to spend 60 minutes a week identifying the right people. Okay? Whether that's using LinkedIn or, whatever CRMs you're using or lead generators, whatever it is, I need to spend 60 minutes a week identifying who the right people are. Okay? And then you may have a second pillar that says, I need to reach out to X amount of those people every week. See, those can be measured. That's how, do you see what I'm saying about knowing what the right thing to do is? And again, I just got done doing a whole slew of national sales trainings because it's, the time of year and everyone's doing them. And that's all I hear. People get excited. This year, I'm going to do more of this and get better at that. And those are not the right things to do. Those are the end points, not the beginning. You don't control those things.
How far along the process should our metric be? Should it be, I want to do X number of hours of emails or calls, outreach or research? Or should we be saying, I want to have X number of conversations so we can inadvertently achieve one goal or target by aiming slightly further along the pipeline and mastering the next? How do we know where these metrics should come from to have maximum effectiveness?
Great question. So what makes something a pillar versus a goal is that it's either what I call an action or a predictable result, meaning you control whether it gets accomplished that week. So, for example, you just brought up a good one. Let's say your goal is I want to connect. Okay? Well, remember, we're talking about a goal right now. I want to have 10 conversations a week with qualified prospects. Well, at some level, and everyone's different. That's why you have to run through the process yourself. For some sales reps, depending on where they're at, the industry, all that kind of stuff, where they're at in their business, they actually, if they did enough activity, it's a predictable result, meaning, as long as they do the activity, they can have 10 conversations, right? So for that person, that can be a pillar. As long as I have 10 conversations a week, everything else seems to take care of itself, right? for Will, as long as I record 3 podcasts a week, right, from a content standpoint, everything else takes care of itself. Okay. But then you might have a salesperson who they're at the stage in their career or their territory or whatever it is where they can't predictably have 10 conversations a week and we got to put criteria around these pillars, right? With a qualified person, a person that meets a certain criteria. So for that person, we got to peel it back a level. And the pillar doesn't become, I have to make 10 connections. The pillar becomes, I need to reach out to X number of, and then whatever the criteria is, or I need to spend 2 hours reaching, see where I'm going with this? You got to keep rewinding it until it's an action or a predictable result.
So for me and the podcast, it would be, well, we get way too many people wanting to come on the show, so I can pretty easily record 3 episodes a week, and I'm in control of that and the diary. But if, like when we started off and it sucked and no one cared, it was real pressure for me I would reframe it then perhaps of, I'll do so much outreach that will hopefully get me to the point of 3 interviews because I can control that versus now I'm controlling the flood of people coming out of the show to try to get on. Is that about right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the way you want to look at it is, see, right now for you have so much incoming traffic, so to speak, people who want to be on the podcast, and congratulations, by the way.
Sorry to interrupt. Let's reframe this because I think there's a better example here of someone who has perhaps inbound leads coming to them that they need to, go from a marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead versus someone who has no help for marketing whatsoever. That's probably a better example to work with.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're someone who has a lot of incoming leads, okay, then leads are not a bottleneck in your business, right? If you have more leads than time. So for that person, they probably wouldn't have a pillar of lead generation or anything of the sort. Instead, what someone like that may have a pillar, and again, we're only talking about one kind of pillar right now, but for that particular person, they may have a goal of, I want to have 20 conversations or something like that. And maybe they can with that amount of leads. So maybe they say, okay, as long as I do enough dials and emails and outreach and follow up, so I have 20 conversations every week, then everything else takes care of itself, right? Now, remember I said you control it. You don't necessarily control how many meetings you wind up having in a week because someone else has to actually show up, agree to it for that week, right? So what you can control, though, what is a predictable result? You can have a pillar of, I need to schedule 20 conversations a week, right? For the future. Make sense?
Makes total sense.
And it sounds like I'm being nitpicky, but I'm not. This is that difference between a pillar and a goal, right?
Well, it's the difference between at the beginning of the year going, I'm going to do X, Y, Z and having a rough plan, and then week 1 realizing you can't track any of it, it goes to shit and you forget it, versus, having 52 weeks of data in front of you where you go, well, I did this, I didn't do this, I did do this. And you can hopefully see then the quarters where you did do it all, it comes together. And then that reinforces everything, right? It makes it all more real. And I know for my dumb brain, as soon as I see something on a graph, a spreadsheet, a piece of paper, as soon as I can see history on something that isn't my own brain reinterpreting it in its own way and trying to save my ego, as soon as I can see it, that something was achieved or wasn't achieved, everything then falls into place moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's an emotional roller coaster that a lot of salespeople are on, because we, as salespeople, as entrepreneurs, a lot of times there's a lapse in time between what we do and the result, getting the sale, right? The money coming in the door, the commission, whatever it is. And so when you judge your weeks and your days based on these lag indicators, like did a sale come through? Did I do this? We can not only get very emotional, but it's very misleading, right? You may have closed 3 accounts this week, but not done all the right things this week. That may have been the compound effect, a lag indicator of what you've been doing for the past few months. And just the opposite. You may have done all the right things this week. You may have hit all your pillars, done all the right things, and for whatever reason, nothing closed. And so it's not just an emotional place to be on Friday night, but it can cause you to change directions when you don't need to, right? You're doing the right things, but your lead indicators and your lag indicators don't work on the same timeline. And so there's this thing we call in the pillar system, the Friday night feeling. And this Friday night feeling is this idea that, look, as long as you cross off, you've done all your pillars that week, you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your business is moving in the right direction. And as people whose jobs, you and I and salespeople, there's no Fred Flintstone that slides down the dinosaur and says, you know, it's from a squawking bird and tells him it. No one tells us our shift is over, right? We're going home to Wilma. There's always more we could be doing. And so you got to look at lead indicators, not just lag indicators, or it can be very dangerous. You start changing directions too much, even when you're on the right path.
For sure. I know this personally. I've experienced this. And there's probably all different levels of cognitive dissonance and psychology that go behind the fact. There's probably reasons why we're wired to forget the fact that 6 months ago you put in a real strong month and then it only appeared this month. And then you feel like you've done something right last week as opposed to that lagging indicator of time of that time in the past. There must be a reason why we're wired this way. But with that said, and I want to get into if there's other types of pillars and how many pillars we need in a second. But how important, with all this said, is just consistency? It's just because it seems like a simple thing, right? Do the right things every day for long enough and you'll have success. But is it really that simple? Because if it is, why don't we all do it?
Yes. Well, I think you know the answer to this. It's simple. It's not easy, right? It's, you know, the great analogy is working out or eating right. We all know if we work out consistent, you know, I do this joke sometimes from the front of the room where I ask people, have you ever done a diet program or an exercise program and it didn't work? You didn't get the results you want, and everyone raises their hand. And then I say, have you ever done a diet or exercise program for a year straight and not gotten results? And they all kind of start giggling because they know what I'm getting at. You could go on, I could make up the mushroom diet today, tell you to go to the gym 4 days a week and eat more mushrooms or something. And if you did that for a year straight, you're going to lose weight. You're going to look better, right? So I think it is that simple to do the right things and do them consistently. I just think that there's two problems. And that is, first of all, like we already talked about, I'm not convinced everyone knows what the right things to do are. I don't think they take it down far enough. They just use generalities like, I need to prospect, I need to follow up more, I need to get better at this or get better at that. So the first part is when you say do the right things, do the right things that you can actually measure, right? That you've boiled down through this process. And then, yes, the second part is obviously doing them consistently. And the whole second part of my book goes into that, the custom accountability program, working with human nature, not against it, to actually hit your pillars each week. Because we are not designed for success. If anyone hasn't figured that out yet, I mean, we are creatures of survival and immediate feedback and comfort. That's why success is so impressive in so many ways, right? We're not like these people that get out there. You are destined for success and you were built to be great. And as a biologist, a former scientist, I'm going, no, you weren't. Right? You were born to survive. Your biology is to survive and be comfortable in short term and, you know, but.
Well, yeah, when you put it like that, that's interesting. We are designed for surviving in the moment. We're not designed, and you know, maybe there's procreation, there's other drives that are slightly more long-term, looking after kids and that side of things. But other than that, we are designed to survive in the moment and then ponder on tomorrow when it comes, as opposed to planning ahead, which clearly is not a good strategy for anyone listening. So with that, Brian, and maybe we'll wrap up the show with consistency in a second, and maybe we'll do another show on that because it's probably a 5-hour conversation in its own right. But how many pillars do we need? Because we know the sales process, there might be 4 steps, there might be 27 steps, depending on how granular you want to get with it in the product that you're selling. But it seems like an obvious one is number of conversations, number of qualified leads, or whatever it is. That could be pillar number 1. And again, we've discussed this thoroughly now of what needs to go in that pillar. How many more pillars do we need typically? Or is 1 good enough if we know that we're going to have 4 great conversations each day leads to our target hit at the end of the month?
Yeah, so great question. And the answer, like all good answers, is it depends, right? Which is, the amount of pillars you have is less dependent on saying I have this many or that many, and it's more dependent on the total time those pillars would take. So, for example, I work with people, they have 7 or 8 pillars, and I do have clients and people I've worked with in the past that have 1 pillar, right? Because it's not that the only thing you do during the week are your pillars. It's just that for some people, if they've got their business to the point where if all they do is X, everything else takes care of itself, right? For other people, there's more areas they need to hit. For example, a lot of people already naturally, like one of the criteria around a pillar is it's not a habit. If something's already habitual, it's not a pillar because by definition, we don't have to focus on it, right? So in other words, if you're already a hustler and you're already the kind of guy who picks up the phone and just always making calls and always talking to people and the activities there and all that kind of stuff, well, that person's pillar might be more focused on what I call a learning pillar or possibly what I call a strategic pillar. I mean, a learning pillar meaning, getting better at something, right? Like you're putting in the reps, maybe you need your results to go up. Maybe you need to work on your story. Maybe you need to work on your messaging. Maybe you need to develop your direct response copywriting skills. Your ability to write an email that someone actually responds to is a pretty important skill. But I think we got to redefine work sometimes. Most salespeople don't think of learning as working, right? As getting better at something as working, yet that's their shortcoming. So learning pillars are important for a lot of people. And so for someone like that, they may have more pillars because they have a learning pillar. A strategic pillar would be something where, when you answer these questions that I've come up with, you're basically looking for something you can organize, plan, or create so that once you've done it each week, some other action becomes more impactful. So we talked earlier about a hit list. So we talked about, identifying qualified candidates, right? Someone who just smiles and dials or, puts out content or whatever it is, just pure activity versus someone who's strategic and actually says, okay, before I spend a bunch of time recording this or before I spend a bunch of time dialing, if I actually figure out who I should call, right, it makes the action of calling more impactful. Make sense?
Makes total sense.
Yeah. So you have guys that have, and I say guys, I'm from New Jersey here in the United States. So guys means guys and girls, by the way. But you have salespeople who, they can get away with, if they just focus on 1, 2, and 3, everything else takes care of itself. Other people, 5, 6, or 7, right? You cut it off at the place where you can realistically do it in a week, of course.
So how do we know then? And the answer is, it depends. Like all seemingly good questions I tend to ask on this show, because it's so contextual and sales is such a kind of a vast industry, right? But how do we know what? So it seems obvious if our pipeline isn't big enough, we need a pillar on number of qualified conversations or something like that to drive more pipeline, which will lead to at least the potential to win more business. And maybe there's other pillars that go along that to reinforce that stream, right? But how do we know whether we are perhaps at maximum capacity with the resources that we have, whether it's content and sales enablement technology or whatever it is, or it's our actual skill set, in which case a learning pillar would be a bigger benefit than perhaps just more calls or a higher number there. How do we work out, Brian, what the biggest bang for buck thing is for us to do right now, or the biggest bang for buck pillar to implement that's going to raise everything up, that will like raise all the ships as opposed to just that one on this is a weird metaphor, the one on stilts that we're stacking up in the corner.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's the process of the pillar system. So what the pillar system does, it asks a series of questions and then runs your answers through some criteria so that whatever comes out the other end is the biggest impact activity. Because what you just said there is a very common problem where they say, I don't have enough leads, therefore I just need to make more calls. I just need to send more emails. I just need to put more YouTube videos out there. The problem is, at a certain point, you're multiplying by 0. If your YouTube videos aren't effective, if your calls aren't effective, doing more of what's not working well is not going to help. And that's where I talk about redefining work. Sometimes the learning pillar is the right thing. In other words, again, I'm still amazed to this day how bad people are at writing emails, right? knowing full well that people don't read their email anymore, they just go through them. They still write their email like it's a letter to their grandmother. Like they're going to read it from top to bottom and then make a decision where they want to reply. No, you've got to learn, as you probably know, direct response copywriting. How do you quickly, within milliseconds, almost subconsciously, get someone to respond and start that interaction, right? Well, that's a skill that can be learned. There's so many great copywriters out there that you can learn anything on the internet these days, right? There's books on spending time on that, even though it's probably not what a lot of people listening here want to hear if they're struggling. But spending time becoming a much better direct response email copywriter, not becoming an expert, but just going from a 1 to a 4 is going to have a bigger impact on your business than just making more calls. And so, like you said, what is that bottleneck or skill that's going to rise? Now, you want to keep making the calls and sending the emails because that's how you test and learn. But again, if your blade is dull, what's the point of keep swinging it, right? What's the point? And so, yeah, that's what these questions do, is they help you boil down to what is truly the bottleneck, the limiting resource, like we talked about on the pre-recorded call. Or before the recording, we were talking about limited resources in a different way.
Is there a way to, I don't know the answer to this, is there a way to visualize this? Because it seems like if we are struggling to get responses to our emails, we don't need to send more emails. And so perhaps sending more emails is a $5 an hour job. That's what it's going to earn us spending. We'll get $5 back for every extra hour that we spend doing that. Versus reading a couple of books on copywriting might be a $200 an hour activity, in that we don't need to do it forever, and perhaps those 200 hours will only last a certain amount of time before it becomes less efficient. But that's a better use of our time, and that will earn us more money over the longer term versus just more emails. Perhaps having a call or reading your book or doing some training on this is a $1,000 an hour activity because it implements wider things. And we can go kind of deeper and deeper into this. You know, if you're a smoker, perhaps it's a $100,000 activity to quit smoking and do whatever you got to do on that front, because it's shortening your life. And so you've got to hustle harder to fit more in for the same amount of kind of effort that someone would if they were just living another 20 years or whatever. Is there a way to, I'm kind of coming up with this off the top of my head, but is there a way to visualize this, or is that a potentially good way of thinking about it?
It's, you know what? It's a great way of thinking about it. And here's why. First of all, as far as visualizing, don't forget the nickname of the pillar system is the index card business plan, right? That's actually the name of the book, because literally to me, your strategy can fit on an index card. Okay. But visualizing it the way you're talking about, it's actually important. And here's why. One of the benefits of running your stuff through the pillar system is you may actually realize that you're in a bad opportunity. And I know people don't want to hear that, but it's like, wait a second. If you're telling me, even if I do this, and this, I'm not going to probably get paid for a long time, then you might be focused in the wrong area. You may have the wrong job. Because do you see where I'm going with this? If your messaging isn't good enough, when your company maybe doesn't provide a good enough message, you don't get enough conversions, just doing more of it's not going to help. And you might realize, okay, I'm going to have to become a 5 in copywriting, and I'm going to have to really work on my messaging. I'm not going to see the results of that for 6 months, 7 months, 9 months. Now, again, I'm not sugarcoating this. You may realize this is not the best opportunity for me right now. Now, the kind of people I tend to work with, usually they're already at that point where they're doing good enough, right? Maybe they're paying their bills, but they want to go next level. And so for them, they have the runway, okay, to start getting better at their copywriting. Because the math is simple. You're never going to grow a business as a single person, as an individual, as a salesperson. You're never going to grow your business to where you want it to be by just doing more. At a certain point, you run out of hours in the day, time for meetings, right? The biggest growth in any business is always going to be higher conversions, getting paid more per meeting, getting paid more per sale, right? Raising your prices is what I call that. And so to visualize that is not a fun thing to do for some people, but it might be the best thing for them to do.
For sure. Two examples on this, and we'll wrap up with this, Brian. One, if you're in a role where perhaps, very literally, this is the first example that came to my mind. If you're in a sales role where your commissions are capped, your runway is only so far, right? I've never worked in a job where commissions have been capped, and I've never got anywhere near getting to the point where people are starting to complain about it.
Sounds like a horrible place to be.
Yeah, but I'm sure there'll be people listening that are in that scenario, and maybe it's capped at 200 grand or whatever, is a nice kind of thick round number like that. That's people can comfortably live on, but you're never going to be able to, if you want to, take it to that next level. So that's a real limit, hard limit, which kind of defines all of this very easily. Another thing that came to mind, and this is marketing and sales, and I won't dive too far into it in case it turns some of the audience off, but with the new version of the sales school, I need to sell it to sales leadership, sales management. So part of what I'm going to be doing is creating content of me cold calling, cold email, doing what we talk about on the show. And clearly we don't promote cold calling as a legitimate tactic to get in front of the C-suite, CSO, CRO very effectively, but I'll do it on video because it'll be hilarious to watch me probably fail and make a mess of it. But the real strategy behind what I want to do is, what we will be doing, what we're starting, is a podcast for sales leaders. So I think this hopefully demonstrates my thought process on some of this, in that I could sit and call people every day, day in, day out, or I can create a piece of content that hopefully thousands of people will listen to who are my customers, who I can slowly and gradually build that know, like, and trust with, so that builds a little bit of inbound pipeline, or, there's some way of communicating with them via the podcast or not on the podcast, and translating it from the podcast to a sales conversation. And that scales, right? And that's a totally different way of looking at it that I know is possible because I've got this far with this show. And I'm sure people, especially if you're not trying to get in front of hundreds of thousands of people, if you're only trying to get in front of thousands of people, there's probably a better way to go about it than just mindlessly calling people every day, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. And one of another pillar criteria, you're kind of leading right into all these criteria because they make sense, is for something to be a pillar, it has to be a high leverage activity. So in other words, if you make 100 calls a day, let's just call it, right, to these C-suite people, just by the law of large numbers, you might get a few wins over time, right?
Yeah.
But is that really the best return on your investment? Whereas by building this podcast, right, it's kind of like the bringing the buckets of water up the hill from the river, right? Like, you do that at first, but while you're doing that, you should be building a pump, a well, because eventually, even though you get nothing out of that well the whole time, when you finally build it and that well is working, all you got to do is push down once and water comes out, right? And so it becomes a high leverage activity, that $1,000 an hour work you were talking about. So it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough place to be for salespeople when you need money now, but you also want to build a good business. They're not always congruent. A lot of times you have to do both.
You're right. It is an interesting balance of, I've been there having my sales. It's one for me to say all this now. And clearly I've doubled down on the world of podcasting and this media platform. But I have had my sales manager on my back. I have had people chasing me down, and I've always hit target or kind of just gone over target. I've never really failed on that front before, but I've been in a position where I'm 6 months away from hitting target, and I need one big deal to come in that I've been working on in a while. And my boss, the national sales manager, I'm getting called down to London for meetings because they're not happy with my performance, even though I know we're going to be fine at the end of the year. So I do get the stresses that the audience are under, and I just wanted to kind of, and you alluded to that, Brian. I just want to kind of point that out of, I don't know if you've been in a similar scenario, but I know that pressure of wanting to do the right things, wanting to work long term, but then having to kind of perform in the midterm as well.
100%. And that to me is like for example, in my own personal business, I have pillars now that make sure I get paid now, right? My one-on-one clients, my, meetings I do, and I go out and do talks and workshops and things like that. But in the background, I have other pillars that I'm working on for hours each week that I see nothing from. But they're high leverage where when they're finished, right? So for example, I'm creating a product, an online course. So you can run through this whole system yourself. When that is done, well, then I can get paid on that when I'm sleeping, right? So that's but I get paid nothing, as you know, creating this now when you had to create your stuff, you get paid nothing now, but you're building it for the future. Well, you can do both, and that's where my pillars are. I have pillars to make sure that I pay my bills every month, right? And I have pillars to make sure that a year from now I'm in a better place than I am now. And those are and both of those are just as important. But if I wasn't pillar focused, then it's easy to say, oh, I'll get to that next week, because there's no consequence on Friday for not working on my product, right? I don't lose any money this Friday. I don't feel the effect.
Good. Love this. Okay, so with that, Brian, I've got one final question, mate, and you can tell us where we can find out more about your pillar system and how to potentially work with you, mate. And the one final question is something I ask everyone that come on the show. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling that has nothing to do with the pillar system?
Better at selling? The piece of advice I wish I had followed, because I'd heard it a million times, right, is plan your day. As funny as that is, I call planning your day broccoli, because it's like we've been hearing our whole life that vegetables are good for us. Well, just because we've been hearing it our whole life and it's white noise at this point, it doesn't mean it's not true. I've been hearing my whole professional career, plan your day, work your plan, right? Don't start your day till it's finished on paper, all the different ways of saying it. And I would just hear it and hear it and hear it. And about 6 years ago or so, I started actually planning my day every day. Sitting there, what's the most important thing, all the things they teach you. And now that I'm on this side of the fence, I don't know how anyone operates any other way.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, if I could tell my younger self, and by the way, that increases sales. When you work strategically throughout a day and focused, everything changes. So that would be my piece of advice.
Love it. Well, the new version of the Sales School comes with a planner, a journal, daily activity planner that helps with some of this. But that's not ready to rock and roll yet. For anyone else who wants to kind of jump into that world a little bit earlier, do you use a journal? Do you use a notepad? Do you create a to-do list the night before? How do you go about structuring that?
I use, for planning my day, I use a legal pad. In the left margin are my appointments for the day. They get highlighted in yellow. And the middle is 3 columns. It's my personal to-do list. The middle is my business to-do list, and I'm simplifying this. And the left side is my priority list. And I have one simple rule. You do not start on the second thing until you're done the first. That's it. That's the rule. You do not start the third thing till you're done the second.
How... Because this is interesting to me. And I promise we'll wrap up in a second. I'm conscious of time. But do you consciously do that? So, and I know you're simplifying it because it can, depending on the day, it could be a sprawl of different activities, right? Based on your pillars. But there seems to be lots of different systems. There's the getting things done system. There's all kind of filing systems. There's planners, kind of what we're working on. How did you refine? Because I feel like you will have thought through this process more than most. How did you refine through to just having 3 columns? Because that seems like simplified genius.
Oh, and by the way, this is in the book. I don't know why I just said that, but I just remembered it. I was like, wait, this is in the book. It was reverse engineered. I've been trying different ways forever, and this just turned out to be the system that works for me. To me, it was just, it was more a mental exercise of making sure I always had a place to get things out of my head.
Yep.
And then, so you can't get back on track unless you actually have a track to begin with, right? And so, to me, it was more of a reverse engineer to it. Simple. That's what I do. I love simplifying things. It's not easy to do, but when I get there, I always think, oh, that was stupid. And then I share it with other people and they go, that was genius. I'm going, really? It's like, that's it.
And that's exactly what I wanted to get out of you. That's what I wanted to kind of suss out there of. I always have every aha moment I have as an entrepreneur, as a salesperson, and I carry a quota internally within our organization, like the audience do as well. It's always I'm just an idiot trying to overcomplicate things. I like numbers. I'm trying to build a system. I want to buy this new app or this software. And 9 times out of 10, it's a piece of paper, a phone, and then just being present with someone and having a conversation and building a relationship. All the stuff that is talked about in books that are written 100 years ago, that's what moves the needle for me. With that, Brian, tell us where we can find out more about you, sir, the book, and anything else you want to share.
You know what? I'll keep it real simple. I don't need all the social media handles. Productivitygiant.com. Productivitygiant.com will take you everywhere you need to be. You can get the book. You can contact me. You can get free reports, things like that.
Good man. Well, I'll link to that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Brian, I want to thank you for your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, mate, and for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
You got it. Thank you so much.